I stood over him while the cold mountain rain washed the blood from my knuckles, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could actually breathe. But I have to ask you all straight up. Did I go too far? Or is there truly no limit to what a father should do when the system fails his child? I burned my life to the ground, spent every cent I owned, and tracked a monster across 3 continents just to look him in the eye and show him that no distance is too far and no mountain is too high for a father seeking bloody justice. So tell me, if you saw the light leave the eyes of the person who destroyed your world, would you feel guilt, or would you feel the same chilling peace that I do right now? My life wasn't always about tracking shadows and sharpening blades. Back then, I was just David, a guy who worried about mortgage rates and whether or not my 14-year-old daughter, Maya, was spending too much time on her phone. Maya was my entire world, a bright, sarcastic, and incredibly talented artist who could capture the soul of a person in a simple charcoal sketch. And after her mother passed away when she was only 6, it had been just the 2 of us against the world. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and a bond that I thought was unbreakable, until the summer evening that changed everything and turned me from a suburban dad into a ghost driven by nothing but rage. It started with a simple party, a graduation celebration for one of her older friends that I reluctantly let her attend because I didn't want to be the overprotective father who stifled her social life. But when midnight passed and she wasn't home, the pit in my stomach began to grow. I called her phone dozens of times, but it went straight to voicemail, and when I drove to the house where the party was supposed to be, I found nothing but an empty driveway and a sense of dread that made my skin crawl. I spent the next 48 hours in a blur of police stations and hospitals, shouting at officers who told me she was probably just being a teenager and would come home when she was ready. But I knew my daughter, and I knew she would never leave me wondering like this. When they finally found her, she wasn't a person anymore. She was a statistic, found at the bottom of a ravine 3 towns over, her body discarded like trash after being subjected to things that no human being should ever have to endure. The lead detective, a man named Miller who looked like he'd seen too much of the worst of humanity, sat me down and told me that the primary suspect was a man named Marcus Thorne, a wealthy entrepreneur with ties to some very dark circles. But before they could even bring him in for questioning, he had vanished. He didn't just leave town, he disappeared off the face of the earth, aided by a legal team and a bank account that allowed him to slip through the cracks of a slow-moving justice system. I waited for the law to do its job, I really did, but as the months turned into a year, the updates from the police became less frequent. The lead detective stopped returning my calls, and the trail went cold while I sat in a silent house, surrounded by sketches of a girl who would never grow up. That was the day David the father died, and the man you're hearing from now was born, because I realized that if the world wasn't going to give Maya justice, I would have to go out and harvest it myself. I sold the house, I sold the cars, and I took every bit of equity and life insurance money I had and poured it into a different kind of education, hiring private investigators who didn't care about red tape and former intelligence operatives who taught me how to disappear and how to find people who didn't want to be found. I followed whispers of Thorne through the underground circuits of Eastern Europe, spending months in damp basements in Prague and neon lit back alleys in Bangkok, always arriving just a few days late, finding only the lingering scent of his expensive cologne and the trail of people he'd paid off to keep his secret. I became a ghost, moving through the world without a footprint, learning how to bridge the gap between a civilized man and a predator, all while keeping Maya's last unfinished sketch in my pocket. Remind me why I was willing to die in a foreign land. By the second year, I had tracked him to a private estate in the Andes Mountains of Peru, a literal fortress built into the side of a cliff where he thought his money could buy him permanent safety from the ghosts of his past. I spent 3 weeks living in the brush, eating cold rations and watching his movements through a high-powered lens, learning the rhythm of his guards and the lay-out of his mountain sanctuary until I knew it better than the home I'd sold. He looked older, more relaxed, sipping wine on a balcony overlooking the clouds as if he hadn't snuffed out the brightest light in my life, and seeing him laugh into his phone triggered a cold, vibrating fury in my chest that nearly made me lose my composure. But I knew I only had one shot at this, and if I rushed in, I'd be dead before I reached the gates, so I waited for the perfect storm, both literally and figuratively, to mask my approach. So that is where I stood, on the edge of a precipice with a knife in my hand and a heart full of black ink, knowing that once I crossed that line, there was no coming back to the man I used to be. Before I tell you about the final confrontation and the absolute chaos that erupted inside those walls, I want you to pause and really think about this. If the person who took everything from you was sitting comfortably on a mountain while the world forgot your pain, what would you do? Comment below right now and tell me if you'd stay within the law and hope for a miracle, or if you'd climb that mountain too, because I need to know if I'm the only one who thinks some sins can only be washed away with blood. I moved under the cover of a torrential downpour, the kind of rain that turns the earth into a sliding mess and muffles the sound of a breaking window, bypassing the electronic security with tools I'd spent a year learning how to use. I took out the first guard in the kitchen, a man who never saw me coming and died wondering why a shadow was holding a blade to his throat, and I felt nothing, no remorse, no hesitation, only a clinical focus on the objective. I moved through the house like a phantom, the opulence of the place disgusting me, every gold leafed frame and silk rug paid for with the misery of people like my daughter, until I reached the heavy oak doors of the master suite. Thorne was there, sitting at a desk with his back to me, looking over spreadsheets as if he were a legitimate businessman and not a monster hiding in the clouds, and when I spoke his name, he spun around with a look of pure, unadulterated terror that I will cherish until the day I die. He tried to offer me money, millions of dollars, telling me that we could work something out, and that he had friends who could make me a very wealthy man if I just walked away. But he didn't realize that I wasn't there for a payout. I didn't want his money. I wanted him to feel the same helplessness Maya felt in those final moments, to understand that all the walls and all the guards in the world couldn't protect him from a father's love turned into a weapon. The fight was short and brutal because he was a coward who relied on others to do his dirty work, and by the time I had him pinned against the floor, he was sobbing, begging for a mercy that he had never shown anyone else. I didn't kill him quickly. I made sure he saw the sketch of Maya, made sure he knew exactly whose father was standing over him, and as the life finally left his eyes, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that had been crushing me for 3 long years. I didn't run when the remaining guards found me. I was sitting in his chair, covered in the evidence of my deeds, waiting for the local authorities to arrive because my mission was over and the outcome for me no longer mattered. I ended up in a Peruvian prison for a while before some of the friends I'd made during my hunt managed to pull enough strings to get me deported back to the States, where I now live in a small apartment, forever changed and forever haunted, but finally at peace. People tell me I'm a murderer, that I should have let the law handle it, but those people have never tucked a child into bed only to find an empty room the next morning, and they don't understand that sometimes justice isn't something you receive. It's something you have to take. I lost my life to find his, and while I'll never get to see Maya grow up or see her sketches in a gallery, I know that she can finally rest because the monster is gone and her father kept his Promise, if you think I did the right thing, or even if you think I'm a monster myself, I want you to like this video to show where you stand on this. Subscribe to the channel for more stories of people pushed to their absolute limits, and please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Was I a hero or just another criminal in a world full of them? I'll see you all in the next story.